NCASA is a nonpartisan organization that works with elected leaders of all parties on priorities for public education. We do not have a political action committee and do not make candidate endorsements, but do think it is important for school leaders and other North Carolina citizens to have information on where the major candidates stand on public education. Let's now move into the first segment of our forum, in which the two candidates for governor will be speaking individually on some key education topics and their own priorities. We at NCASA are very honored to be providing the first forum of this general election season in which both candidates for governor will be speaking live to an audience at the same event. We are especially appreciative that the audience includes many of our state's local superintendents, principals, and other important school leaders in our NCASA membership. And we appreciate the support from WRAL News to make a live stream of this forum accessible to other North Carolina citizens. First, it is my honor and my privilege to introduce the Honorable Roy Cooper, the current governor of North Carolina and the Democratic nominee who is seeking re-election. A North Carolina native, an attorney from Nash County, he has an extensive career in public service, including previous terms in the North Carolina House and Senate, followed by 4 terms as our state's Attorney General since 2001, before his election as governor in 2016. Governor Cooper, we appreciate you for being with us today, and it is now my honor to let you speak to our audience.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm grateful for our public school administrators and educators, and I'm so appreciative of our public school teachers. My mom was a teacher. I'm the product of our public schools, and I understand how hard educators work to create an opportunity and give children a foundation for a successful future. When I became governor, our schools were facing real challenges. We weren't where we needed to be with teacher pay, and too many of our best educators were leaving the state or even the profession itself. I've worked to get us moving in the right direction, and we've made progress. As governor, I've pushed this legislature to raise teacher pay, expand pre-K, and reestablish the Teaching Fellows Program, but it's not nearly enough. I've drawn a line in the sand when it comes to our teachers, when the legislature hasn't done enough, and I'm not going to quit until we make meaningful progress. Right now, our educators are facing unparalleled challenges in this new, unique school year that's currently underway. We can't keep leaving our teachers behind, but expecting them to lead the way for our students, especially during a pandemic. We trust our teachers to mold our students. Let's put our money where our trust is. One of the best things we can do for teacher morale is to make sure that they know that their state cares about them and to speak positively about their good work. I'll keep fighting to give our educators pay raises, ones they deserve. We need to invest and make sure that we can attract and retain the very best. I support raising pay for public school teachers to at least the national average and reinstating master's pay and other advanced degree pay. My plan allows teachers up to 30 years of service to earn more for each year of service. And I've also proposed restoring extra pay for teachers who hold a master's degree in the subject that they're teaching, and then eliminate this requirement that we have that teachers pay their own substitutes when they have to take a personal leave day. I'm pushing to raise the per pupil funding for our public schools. This will help us fund more teacher assistants, counselors, and other school support staff. It's also going to be critical when it comes to recruiting teachers. We're all painfully aware that our teacher pipeline is in trouble. It's going to get worse with this pandemic. We need to do more than ever to let people know that teaching is an honorable profession. It's a calling in life, and that you can make a decent living and have a rewarding experience being a teacher in North Carolina public schools. As governor, I'm recruiting teachers now. When I visited classrooms before the pandemic, I'd usually ask, who wants to be a teacher when you grow up? And I would talk about how important it is to be a teacher. that we need better pay, better benefits, and we need to treat our teachers better. We need to make it a priority right now to get good people into this profession. Another way to do it is to substantially expand the Teaching Fellows Program for all of our state campuses. It's appalling that our HBCUs are not yet a part of the restructured Teaching Fellows Program. This is one of the best deals that I can think of to recruit teachers. Say to them, hey, we're going to pay for your college education if you give us at least 4 years teaching in our public schools. When we first started Teaching Fellows scholarships back when I was in the state legislature, I was on one of the very first interview teams, and I was stunned to see that we were getting the top students across the state who were willing to step up and be teachers. We have to use this tool of scholarships, and we also have to provide incentives for getting people into the teaching profession. Inadequate funding has forced schools to cut back on critical positions like school nurses, counselors, psychologists, and social workers. That's one of the reasons why I devoted a substantial amount of money in this pandemic of CARES Act funding for the schools to use for these positions. Because we know that children need access to mental health specialists and other wraparound services. We have to keep in mind the importance of building the foundation for future learning, health, and well-being during early childhood. So we have to invest in early childhood education. This year, I announced one of the state's largest infusions of new dollars in our early childhood system. $56 million, which will go toward early childhood education and health outcomes for at-risk children. We need to continue to expand these opportunities. Please take a look at our early childhood action plan to see where we're going and how we're going to measure ourselves. I'm also excited about the recommendations of my task force on access to a sound basic education, and I look forward to pushing forward the Leandro lawsuit funding. We also got to expand Medicaid. We have to close this healthcare coverage gap. Expanding Medicaid would extend coverage to more than 500,000 people, including working families, veterans, and it does it without additional tax dollars. If we can expand Medicaid like 39 other states have done, we can cover rural working North Carolinians. And this will be good for our children, especially when it'll provide health insurance for many of their early childhood teachers. Expanding Medicaid would also bring tens of thousands of jobs to North Carolina, reduce the cost of private health insurance, and keep our rural hospitals open. We're going to keep pushing for Medicaid expansion. My opponent, the lieutenant governor, keeps saying no. I will say, I try to urge people to know what's going on in our public schools and to talk about the amazing work our educators are doing for our students. A lot of people who really don't know what's happening in our public schools complain about it from afar, but there are so many positive things taking place. And if we can lift up our public schools and show the good things that are happening, we can bring more positive results. We all know that this pandemic has been extraordinarily hard on teachers, students, and parents. As we fight through it, we have to invest in remote learning and make sure that we have high-speed internet access to all parts of our state, make sure that children have devices, and make sure that families can afford to access the internet once they have it. We're making progress, but we have to do a lot more. In my compromise budget, I call for school construction bond to invest in repairs and construction on aging schools across the state without cutting resources from other vital programs. My bond proposal also provided for $250 million for high-speed internet access. The legislature's budget this time did not do enough for our schools and offered no guarantee that school construction would be completed. When you think about budgets, you got to think about priorities. My budgets favor public education over tax breaks for the corporations and the very wealthiest among us. We have to do better. We also need to do a better job of assessing students to help them and to help their teachers as well. I signed a bill into law that reduced the number of state exams that students are required to take. This eliminated over 20 mandated state exams, which were used to evaluate teacher performance. A reasonable and tailored assessment system that gives teachers and parents accurate information without sacrificing accountability should help children learn without over-testing. This pandemic has been hard, and I know we all want our schools to get back to normal. As governor, I'm using science and data to make the hard decisions about getting our children back to in-person instruction as quickly and as safely as possible. But it was stunning to hear my opponent, the lieutenant governor, say last week that as governor, he would fill up every classroom immediately with no safety guidelines and no mask requirement. Not only is that wrong, it's dangerous and ignores the science and advice of public health officials. It ignores the CDC. It ignores the Academy of Pediatrics and the White House Coronavirus Task Force. We all want our schools to get back to normal, but we can't wish this pandemic away. We have to put safety over politics, and we have to do more for public education, not less. But those who don't take precautions and don't wear masks are often the same people who hinder our progress. They're holding back the timeline of getting children safely in school because they're encouraging the spread of this virus. They're letting their friends and neighbors and family members down. We owe it to each other, and we owe each other a lot more than that. And we should expect a lot more from our leaders, especially. Thankfully, most North Carolinians are being responsible and doing what they need to do. But my opponent, the lieutenant governor, has been holding indoor, in-person campaign events without masks or social distancing for months now. He's routinely put people in harm's way and is spreading misinformation instead of doing what's best for the health and safety of North Carolinians. He's even said masks don't work. He took it to a whole new level last week when he again denied science and promised that as governor, he would lift the mask mandate. I think Lieutenant Governor Forrest really has one goal for our public schools: starve them for funding and then use those tax dollars to help rich people send their kids to private schools using vouchers. That's right. Not only does he support vouchers, but he also wants to take the income limits off. School vouchers are wrong. They hurt our public schools. I think he's satisfied with teacher pay and per pupil funding, and he'll rubber stamp anything that the legislative leadership tells him to do or say. We need a governor who's going to push this legislature and hold them accountable for public education. I'm committed to education and all that it can do for our workforce and to bring about my mission for North Carolina. And that's a state where people are better educated, where they're healthier, where they have more money in their pockets, and they have opportunities to live lives of purpose and abundance. That's what I want. And strong public education can help fulfill that mission. I appreciate all of the work you do, and I appreciate everyone listening this afternoon, and I would appreciate your support in my re-election for governor of North Carolina. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Governor Cooper, for sharing your time and your perspectives with us today and for your leadership in these challenging times. Next up, it is my pleasure to introduce the Republican nominee for governor, the Honorable Dan Forrest, who is the current Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina. A Charlotte native, he was a successful architect and businessman for more than 20 years before moving into public service. He was elected Lieutenant Governor in 2012 and is now completing his second four-year term, where he presides over the state Senate and serves on the state's Board of Education and Board of Community Colleges. Lieutenant Governor Forrest, thank you for being with us today, and it is now my honor to ask you to address our audience.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you guys today and to talk about education. That certainly sounded like a political speech from my opponent, and I would just say full of untruths across the board and character assassination, which is really unfortunate from the top leader of our state that he would actually choose to do that. And many of the things he said are completely untrue. So, you know, obviously I've spent a lot of time on education. I love the topic of education, and I like to think about excellent education for all of our students across the board. I mean, what does excellent education look like for students? Obviously, everybody here knows that I am a proponent of school choice. But I'm a proponent of school choice because I believe that parents really do want what is best for their students. And sometimes a one-size-fits-all approach to education doesn't work for everybody. We know that 80% or more of our parents and students choose traditional public schools. Some choose charter public, some choose homeschool or private school. But I think that's the way it should be. I think that the competition in that raises the bar for everybody, and everybody gets to learn from one another, and we can then talk about best practices. I was really under the impression from the invite that this was going to be Q&A driven and talk about the priorities here, but the governor was very clear that he was espousing a lot of things that the General Assembly worked on, and quite frankly, a lot of things that I worked on, and taking credit for things like teacher raises when he actually vetoed every single teacher pay raise budget. Every single one he vetoed, and he said no to it. He was claiming that he wanted more money for teachers, and yet he was willing to give them nothing in an increase, including the last budget, where there was another 4% increase plus a bonus, and the governor was very clear to say, no, zero is good because I want more. I don't understand the logic of that. We have given teachers compensation increases over the last 7 years through the General Assembly. And I'm proud of that. We've done a great job, about 20% increase. We're getting to the place where the teachers that have served the longest have opportunities to get bigger increases as well. And we'll continue to do that. Nobody's ever said that that's going to stop along the way. And so I think we've done a great job. We found ourselves to be #1 in the increase in spending in the Southeast, #1 in teacher pay increases in the Southeast. We're continuing to make great progress. So for Dan Forrest and a new administration, the top priorities would certainly be focused on things like safety and security in the classroom. Safety and security for the students, and safety and security for the teachers and the staff as well. We've seen that get out of hand, and we've seen some real tragedy happen around the country. I believe we should have armed resource officers in all of our schools to protect our teachers and our students. It's very rare that any incidents happens in a school anywhere in the country when you have that situation. So we need to make sure that we protect from the outside, but also from the inside. I don't think we should have any tolerant policy for bullying in schools, whether that's one student to another or student to teacher. I think that those situations need to be dealt with swiftly because our students and teachers both need to feel safe and secure in the classroom. Another top priority would be the return of character education, morality, character, integrity, trust, respect, and respect for authority. And I believe that that's really important because we've seen that decay over the years, and that's where you get threats to teachers and threats to staff and threats student to student. And I just think that that's something that we need to respond to and return to in the classroom. Respect for human dignity would be another one. So we've seen a deterioration of that. I would like to focus on principal recruitment. As I've traveled across North Carolina and visited schools from one end to the other, the one thing that I always notice in the schools that are considered excellent schools is they have excellent principals. And excellent principals attract and retain excellent teachers. There's been surveys done across the country as to why teachers leave the profession, and the #1 reason is because of a bad principal-teacher relationship. They leave because of their leadership. So just as with anything else across the country, when it comes to an organization, a company, anything else, leadership really matters. And so leadership in the classroom matters. We need to attract and retain great principals, and we need to train them as well. We need to spend the resources needed to train our principals to be excellent principals, because I really believe that they have the ability to hire excellent teachers and keep them in the long term. We need to let our teachers teach. I mean, I think that this is a basic concept. We need to remove the barriers to teaching. All the regulations and mandates and data collection and all the stuff that's done in a classroom from day to day, we need to remove all those barriers, allow our teachers to do what they know how to do, and that is to teach in the classroom. I'm not knocking data collection. I think data is important, but there's a limit to that. When we spend so much time collecting data that we're not teaching kids, and we're not using that data effectively to make sure that kids are taught better, then all we're doing is collecting data. So, and then any kind of useless mandate where a teacher is spending more time doing paperwork than they are teaching their kids, we need to eliminate those things. We need to continue to eliminate any kind of testing that is frivolous. I've worked with the General Assembly for years to continue to do that, and we do. And so removing any kind of teaching to the test types of mandates that we have out there, and what people call high stakes testing. I really don't call them high stakes testing, but it is testing. And there's a place for testing, but we should finally in North Carolina make the move to a competency-based model. Allow those students who have the ability to learn at a more quick pace, to allow them to do that, and allow those students who need to slow down and take more time, allow them to do that as well, and slow down, and allow the teachers to spend time with them. So, we can move to the competency-based model now. We have the technology to do that now, and we need to certainly make that happen in the classroom. I think we also should allow our teachers to be innovators in the classroom. I think that's one of the pluses of the charter school movement, is in the charter schools, the teachers, when I talk to a teacher that's moved from a traditional public to a charter public, the one thing that they always mention to me is they say, I really feel free to teach and make mistakes. They don't feel like they're being judged for their mistakes or graded for their mistakes, or that they're going to be held accountable at a level that's unfair because they're trying to do something innovative in the classroom. So allow the teachers to do that. And if you fail at something, pick them back up and say, thanks for trying something that's a little bit different, and making sure that we're always pushing the envelope. I think we should also have transparency across the board in education. The state spends billions of dollars in funding for education. It's our largest funding element out there for the entire state. We need to have transparency. We need to know where that money goes. There was a question on this questionnaire for this about funding for K-12 education. Even in the Leandro case, the judge was clear to say, we're not going to spend our way out of the challenges that we have for a sound basic education, but we do need to know where the money's going. And when people are doing things wisely and they're having good effects from the money they spend, we need to be able to duplicate that in other places. And we need to make sure that money is not being wasted in certain areas as well. So I really think that that transparency model is one that we need to push across the state. We need to raise the bar for students as well. I think we need to have much higher expectations for our students. We need to say to them, you can achieve whatever you desire to achieve if you work really hard at it. We don't need to lower the bar in education. We don't need to lower education standards so more students graduate. Graduation rates are generally meaningless. If you ended up not teaching kids anything and giving them A's for doing it, you can graduate 100% of your students and claim victory. But we all know that's not the intent of what we want to do. We want to raise the bar for students so that they can achieve huge things in the world around us. And I think they want that bar to be raised. I think they want teachers and principals to hold them accountable for excellence across the board. So raising the standards. I also think we need to spend time teaching relevant topics in education, making sure that if there are things there that we shouldn't teach anymore, that we change and we move on. I'll give you a couple quick examples. One is when we came to the realization that we really weren't across the board for all schools had any kind of mandatory economics or financial literacy. Student loan debt is the #1 form of debt in the country right now, over just a massive amount of money. I want to say it's $1.5 trillion, billion and a half, I can't remember the number, but it's a lot of money. It's the biggest form of debt in the country. And so students need to be able to understand how all the levers of the economy actually work in America. And so we implemented very quickly a financial literacy and economics course and raised the standard for that and made that mandatory for high school students. I think that's a good thing. I think all students should enter their life and their jobs with an understanding of financial literacy and sound economics of how the levers of the economy actually work in America and around the world. So we did that. And we also recognized that there were about, this was about 3 years ago, that there were thousands and thousands of jobs on the market, about 15,000 at the time for computer science. There were about 30,000 prior to the Corona economy hitting. But we realized that, wow, those are 15,000 jobs on the market in North Carolina that equated to about $1.5 billion in salary. And we weren't training our students effectively for computer science. So we jumped into action really quickly. We put together a task force to put together computer science standards for the first time in North Carolina. And we did that in record time by bringing people from the education world around the table with people from the professional world and the industry around the table to put together standards that met the needs for the jobs that were on the market today. Sometimes we think about the jobs that are in the future, and sometimes we're training for things that are in the past. But we need to think about really what's there today. And so we have this ability to create these standards. We did that in record time. We rolled those out. And we're going to be teaching computer science in a real way in North Carolina for the first time, and providing our students in North Carolina with real opportunities for jobs that are going to be well-paying jobs for the future as well. So we need to be nimble and efficient in North Carolina with the way we create standards, with the way we recognize what's going on in industry, and with the way we train our students and our teachers effectively to be able to teach and learn these things. So we need to kind of change the bar on how we do that as well. I think we also need to intentionally engage with the business community out there. There are people all around us that have needs, and I believe our teachers would actually enjoy doing this, bringing more professionals into the classroom, talking about the opportunities that actually exist in their own neighborhoods sometimes. I was visiting SAS not long ago, and actually this was for the computer science task force. We were at SAS and we had a roundtable going on as we're coming up with those standards. And one of the young men who worked for SAS, he was an African-American young man, he said, you know what? He said, if I go back into my community where I grew up, nobody would even know that the job I do actually exists, much less know that they can achieve the opportunity to do this kind of job. Well, that's pretty sad, because that's right here in our community. And we have some awesome opportunities for our young people all over North Carolina that exist right in their communities. We need to make sure that our students know that they have the opportunity and get their hands on those things. And we can have apprenticeship programs where they can, while they're in school and while they're getting their high school diplomas and while they're getting their college degrees, that they can actually work for these companies, sometimes get paid by these companies to do that, learn very valuable trades and skills or professions, and then graduate with something like a great job at SAS in their hand or in their pocket. I mean, I think those kinds of things we really need to be thinking about, so that students don't go, students drop out of school because they don't know why education, how education is relevant to them. And so we need to make sure that they know that education is relevant to them. Just related to the coronavirus pandemic and the misinformation that the governor was just spreading about what I said. I never said allow every kid to get back in the classroom without mask and without any restrictions. There was a press conference out there. You can go look it up. You can see my words exactly. I said I would lift the mask mandate, and I would, as have many states around the country. Many states around the country do not have a mask mandate. They say you need to be responsible. As we would say to the school districts across North Carolina, be responsible, do what is right for your students. And you school administrators can make that decision of how you can best open up your schools in a healthy way and get kids back in the classroom. If the governor was serious about the health of students related to the classroom, he wouldn't just say, well, we're going to open up elementary schools next. He would say, we're going to close down private schools that are already meeting all across the state of North Carolina, been meeting in person for 9 weeks with no outbreaks and no health risks at all. They've already been doing it. If there was a health concern out there, the governor should shut them down. He shouldn't let them keep going. So I think those are things to consider. We can get our students back in the classroom in a healthy way. We know that North Carolina was not prepared to shut down school for a year. We're going to have kids that are left behind for an entire year, and they're not going to make it up. And you all know that. You guys know that better than anybody else. If a student falls behind in North Carolina for a year, if they're a third grade student and they don't learn how to read in the third grade, we know the consequences of that as well. So we need to make sure we get our kids back in the classroom in a healthy way. That should be left up to every district out there, and allow our teachers to get back in a healthy way as well. And if there's a teacher with true health risks and true health concerns, then that principal can deal with that teacher. They can continue to teach online, but allow those parents who want their kids back in the classroom that opportunity to do that. We can do that. Schools all over the country are doing this. They're open all over the United States. And our governor wants you to think that nobody else in the country is doing this, and this is some horrible thing to get kids in the classroom. It's not. In fact, child abuse, which you all know the statistic, is down 50% in America. Child abuse is down 50%. Why? Because the teachers, because the people that pay attention to these things are not paying attention now because the kids are at home. Could you imagine being locked in the house with your abuser for a year? The teachers, the school nurses, the administrators, they know the questions to ask. They're the ones that give help to these kids. Not to mention the depression, the anxiety, not to mention that 1 out of 4 people, young people under the age of 25, have seriously contemplated committing suicide during this pandemic. Not to mention the addiction to drugs and alcohol and pornography and screen addiction, not to mention the abuse and all the other things that are going on out there. The effects of this coronavirus on the backside are going to be worse than the coronavirus themselves. I firmly believe that. But nobody wants to mention that. The governor doesn't mention all those things. He just blindly goes along and acts like none of that stuff is happening, and you know it is. You know in your classrooms how you deal with these kids and how you help them out from these difficult situations. So we need to get our kids back in the class. You know how to do that safely and securely. That's what I said. That's what Phil Berger said. And that's what these other school leaders and parents who stood up there on that podium watching or doing that press conference said as well. The governor knows that. The media knows that. So go look for yourself for what people say, and don't believe the political rhetoric that's going on out there. As for him bringing in what I'm doing politically out there, there has not been one single case of coronavirus mentioned for any event that I've done anywhere. So there's no super spreader events going on or any of that kind of thing. That's just ludicrous. And the governor knows that as well, and so does the media. But again, go look for yourself and find out what's going on there. So getting back to the other stuff that we need to do, I think that we need to as well continue the push for broadband connectivity. We've seen that now. During the coronavirus shutdown, we were not prepared in North Carolina for virtual learning. The poor students always lose out, and you know that. It's the poor students who are impacted the most. They're the ones that don't have connectivity in their homes, or the ones that don't have devices in their hands, or the ones that don't always have parental and adult involvement in their life to help them navigate this situation of virtual learning. So we need an emergency plan for when we actually have a real emergency again. We need to implement it. We need to make sure that our students are prepared, our teachers are prepared to teach that way, and the tools, the technology, the content, the curriculum, the delivery mechanisms, the safety and security mechanisms are all in place. We can do that. We can do that in record time in North Carolina. We can make that happen. It's very difficult to do in the midst of a pandemic. Our teachers are doing the best they can. I hear from teachers saying, listen, I don't want to teach this way. I'm not equipped and prepared to teach this way. That's why we don't need to try to do this in the midst of a pandemic. We need to come out of this and make sure that we do this well. I think this pandemic will be a catalyst for getting broadband connectivity in the last mile. When I was running the first time for Lieutenant Governor, I made the claim that I said, I believe North Carolina can be the first state in the nation to have every single classroom connected to high-speed broadband. First state in the nation to have every classroom connected to high-speed broadband. I actually made that happen. I worked with the General Assembly where there was $20 million there for that. We got another $12 million from the General Assembly for that purpose. I went and worked with the FCC on multiple occasions. This was under the Obama administration. We got another $64 million to have $100 million a year going into broadband connectivity. And a couple years ago, we actually became the first state in the country to have every classroom connected to high-speed broadband. Many of you don't know that because the media didn't talk about it. Nobody talked about it, acted like it wasn't a big deal. It's a huge deal, and you all know it because you have that connectivity in your classroom. I helped lead the digital learning plan in North Carolina, the best digital learning plan in the country happened right here in North Carolina, along with DPI and the Friday Institute and a lot of bright minds that worked on that to say we have an order for how things happen in North Carolina, and we need to make sure that we move in that order. It used to be that we had computers stacked up in classrooms and they collected dust in the corner, and teachers didn't have content to use. They didn't know what, they didn't have any connectivity to connect to the things they needed. So we said, here's the order of things. We need to make sure we have, number one, we have connectivity in the classroom first. That's the number one thing. We've done that. We need to make sure that we have content and delivery mechanisms for that content. That was number two, to make sure the teachers are trained to use these tools in the classroom. That's number three. That's been going on as well. And devices were number four. And devices are getting close to being ubiquitous now. And so we're going to continue that process of that digital learning plan. Other states are contacting us regularly to learn about our digital learning plan. I led that effort for the state. Again, something you will never know, but we can use all that same methodology that we use for the digital learning plan to make sure that our students have last mile connectivity as well. So we can make it a public-private partnership, get our last mile connected all across North Carolina, and be the first state in the nation. We are the second most rural state in America, by the way, by population. And we could be the first state in the nation to actually have our last mile connected, just like we did our classrooms connected. And I'll look forward to continuing to lead that effort as well. I think we also need to implement more technical education in the classroom. We're doing a good job in a lot of schools right now, bringing that back. But when students want to know, what they need to do to succeed in the world today, I'll often ask students, especially in middle school age, I'll say, hey, do any of you want to be a millionaire when you grow up? And if the kids are young, they all raise their hands and say yes. And my response is, you should go be a plumber. Because those fixers in our world are aging out at about 60 years right now. And plumbers on average hourly probably make more than lawyers do. So we have enough lawyers in this world. Let's go get some plumbers and some mechanical and HVAC folks and people like that actually fix things with their hands, because those are never going to go out of style. And there are students that love to do that. There are students that love to work on cars. These are high-tech jobs now. These are well-paying jobs. We shouldn't shy away from that. So I think we need to rebrand and expand those opportunities. And then just to wrap up here, we need to ensure that we are building working relationships with the legislature, the governor's office, the State Board of Education, DPI, school administrators. We need to have really close working relationships. We don't need to be in combative relationships. We need to work together so that we're working across the board to do what's best for our students and put our students first. And finally, I think we need to celebrate our successes. There's a lot of great successes in North Carolina across the board for education. Everything's not dire and bad like some people want you to think. Let's take those successes and actually celebrate them and let the world know what we're doing in North Carolina. Let the world know what the good stuff is. Celebrate our great teachers, celebrate our great principals, and let's move forward for the sake of the students.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Forrest, for joining us today to share your perspectives and priorities for public education. Thank you also for your leadership and service as our Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you.
And all the work that you've done with the State Board of Education. Certainly appreciated at this critical time in our state. Okay, we truly appreciate both candidates for taking the time to participate in this forum today and for the differing perspectives that they have shared with our school leader audience and other North Carolina citizens.